Welcome to RPG Research and our weekly RPG Researchers discussion. I'm your host, Hawk Robinson, and joining in everybody else's remote today, as it typically is for our Tuesday mornings. Everybody else, want to check in and say hello. Let's start with, let's see, we'll start here in Spokane. Eric, are you here?
He is here.
Okay.
Let's try it again.
Okay.
I guess I'll refresh.
Okay. The joys of remote. Hello. Good morning, Eric.
Complete consistency, but he uses my microphone.
No, but your audio's being wonky. What are you doing?
Okay, one more refresh. One more. I'm sure it'll be perfect this time.
Are you back? Must be doing a longer refresh. All right, well, we're waiting for him. Omar, do you want to check in from Saudi Arabia? Or are you in Saudi Arabia, or are you still back in England?
No, I'm still in England.
Okay, sorry. How long are you there for?
Till the end of December.
Oh, okay. Great. Are you visiting family, or?
No, I was visiting friends, basically.
Okay, cool. Well, how are you doing today?
I'm fine.
Good. How has work been on the blog posting?
Did you get my email last week?
That's a good question. If I did,
I was surprised I didn't hear back from you.
Yeah, I as I said, I've been really sick since, so Monday I came down with a head cold, and Tuesday morning it was just getting worse. After that meeting, I basically slept for 36 hours with a fever, and then all through the rest of the week, and then it went into my lungs. And so the rest of the week I've been trying to function, but let's see here. So that's probably why I missed it, because
no, that's fine.
Kind of a minimum, but we need to get.
It's why I had to miss last week's meeting. I don't know if you guys had one.
We did have. What's that?
It's why I missed last week's meeting. I was in the hospital.
Yes. Oh, that's right. That's right. So what happened? Are you okay? Without getting too personal, since we're broadcasting live, but.
No, it's just like a triple whammy of unlucky. I basically fainted in public, then went to the hospital.
Oh.
Then they told me I had strep, which is the throat infection.
Yep.
Which has nothing to do with the fainting.
Okay.
Then the next day I got an infection from my wisdom teeth.
Oh.
And so I had to be sedated on painkillers for the past week. I just got it on Sunday.
Oh my.
Yeah. I keep getting strep every time I come to the UK, which I'm not really sure why.
Oh, that's interesting. Are you coming to the same locations each time in England? Is it a particular place that's causing it, or is it different? Is it not the same places?
No, apparently the doctor's if you're not used to, from when you're a kid, very cold weather, you just are more likely to get infections, or especially things related to the throat during cold.
Uh-huh.
It's really not that cold here, especially compared to somewhere like Spokane, but for me, this is freezing.
Right, yeah, from where you're coming from.
Only 4 degrees at night, but to me, it's just death.
Right.
I can't handle this.
Right. Oh, I'm so sorry. But you're medicated
I'm fine.
Recovering now. Okay.
No, they wanted me to take antibiotics. I said no.
Huh.
I'm not a fan of taking too much antibiotics. I had to take them last year for the same thing, so I was like, I'm just gonna let it pass.
Okay. Well, as long as your body is strong enough to do that, that's great. My grandmother died from strep. So when my mom was about 16, well, about 15, her mother was allergic to penicillin, and back then that was the only antibiotic. And it eventually crept into. It took about a year, but it crept into her heart and lungs. It took about a year to kill her. And strep almost did me in back in 2000, end of 2003. I had a really bad back injury from one of my radio towers collapsing, and I was bedridden for about 2 months because I tore T5, T6 in my spine, and so I was bedridden, and I caught strep, and the first 3 rounds of first 2 rounds of antibiotics didn't work, so I had strep for like a couple of months, and it really badly weakened me, and I had, between the back injury and the strep, I had to go through about 5 years of physical therapy. It was a long haul. So it's something, if your system's strong enough, great, but you don't want to mess around with it. It can escalate.
No, they said I did take antibiotics at the hospital. It wasn't completely nothing. They just said that they wanted to do a week's course, and I was like, I don't want to take, because I'm very aware of taking too much antibiotics is bad for you. Yes,
of course. The problem is people take it for flus and colds, which antibiotics won't do any good, and so
Oh no, I know. Yeah, it's my wisdom teeth, which was the other issue, are coming in, and I can't get rid of them.
Okay.
I just have to wait till they come in, and I keep having infections from them.
Yeah, the gum.
So I kept having to take antibiotics for that too. So I'm not a fan of having to keep taking it.
Sure, understood.
But that I had to though, because it was a very, very bad infection.
Yeah, no, that's rough. I have all my wisdom teeth. I didn't have mine pulled, and yeah, the gum there can get infected easily. Mine didn't get too bad, but I've heard stories. Well, here's hoping.
Mine is coming in sideways. That's why.
Ooh, and you can't get them removed?
They said they have to come out fully, because otherwise I'd have to do dental surgery, which they're saying they never do unless it's absolutely necessary.
Oh, yeah, because it's socialized medicine, yeah.
It's also on anesthesia, so I was like, I don't really want to do that.
Yeah, well, yeah, here in the States, generally, if they think if your jaw isn't going to handle it, they try to pull them before they come out, before they get embedded in your jaw. But either way, it's oral surgery, no matter what.
Oh no, so. All my brothers and sisters out there are that way, but my doctor was like, yeah, we can't take yours out because they're coming in sideways, and there's no way to do a surgery. Great.
Well, I'm so sorry. That's rough. Well, here's hoping things get better for you soon.
Can't see them going down any further, medically speaking.
Oh, no, don't say that.
Yeah, here's hoping.
Yeah. Okay, so you and I were you and I were both laid out this past week. So I understand. Yeah. So I take it you haven't had time to work on it because you've been sick as can be.
I finished the research completely. I literally just had to write it down.
Okay.
I also read Eric's.
Okay. Good. That's more than I started on Eric's, but I was kind of delirious, so I was kind of rereading the same thing over and over.
It's like maybe if I read it when I'm not feeling so poor, it'll be better.
Exactly. Okay, so there is. Let's see who else is here with us. Is it Jonathan or who else is here with us?
I'm here.
Okay, great. And we do not have Daniel out of Brazil today, I take it.
That doesn't appear so.
Okay. So Jonathan, how are you doing today?
Grateful to report no medical issues like everyone else. But I got my best of those last year, and I got viral meningitis.
Are you using the phone app or desktop app?
I am using the phone app.
Okay, so that's what it sounded like, because you are being a bit garbled because of what sounds like bandwidth issues.
Okay, let me see if I can fix it here.
Okay.
Refresh mine one more time.
You're sounding okay though, Eric.
Well, now everyone else is garbed.
Oh, great. All right, go ahead.
Everyone else is clear, crystal clear when no one can hear me.
Go ahead.
How about now?
It still sounds pretty poor. Are you using Wi-Fi or cellular on your phone?
I can't even it switched back to cellular. Let's see what Wi-Fi does for me.
Okay.
Okay, back on Wi-Fi. No.
Give it a minute for it to finish its buffering and unbuffering. And what I found with Wi-Fi, for example, here before each broadcast, I reset both my Wi-Fi access point and my cable modem router before each broadcast, because otherwise the buffers, the ARP cache and stuff tend to fill up throughout the day previously. And so resetting those routers usually clears up a lot of issues when using Wi-Fi.
Oh, okay.
But so far you sound okay. It sounds like that might be better. We'll see here. At least when you said that. It was
Okay.
clear. So how are you doing? I couldn't understand anything you said previously.
Okay. Unfortunately, no medical issues to report.
Good.
So sorry about your guys' troubles. I had my fill of that last year, and I got bone meningitis. So.
Oh my. Oh boy.
Yeah,
you had more than your fair share. Well, good.
Yep, and otherwise, I'm about caught up. I have many hours of videos remaining to watch, but I plan on those throughout December. So.
Okay. Okay. Great. I'm glad it's coming along. That page will be getting some updates probably after I get back from PAX Unplugged, because I've had several requests to fill in more on the RPG education, RPG therapy side. Again, that's optional. That's more for the people who are pursuing so you have the baseline for all volunteers, and then we get deeper and deeper, and so that list is going to start getting updated. But I'm too busy with everything else right now trying to get ready to work on it this week. But when I get back, I've had multiple game masters request I get the list more complete. I have like different lists here on my laptop, and I'm trying to get them put into there for to be more useful to everybody else. Just yesterday, I had another one say he wanted to know what the check. He's finished the list. He's been with a couple of weeks, and he's already finished most of the rest of the list, and now he wants to start in on the education and therapy list as well, just so he gets the baseline, because he wants to go long term down that path. Most of the game masters, they're more into the recreation type game mastering, but a few of them want to go deeper with it. So I'll be updating that list hopefully next week. But yeah. So now I think you said you're going to be there at PAX Unplugged as well. Is that right?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Are you going to be at both the panels I'm at?
Yep.
Wonderful.
If nothing hurts me, yes.
Excellent. And I'm keeping my schedule open, other than those panels, for pretty much just being open to network with everybody else. And if people say, "Hey, come on over to our thing," then I'm free to do so. I haven't locked myself into anything. The lesson I've learned from previous conventions is that's the best use of them for me is keeping my schedule open for the networking opportunities and making contact with everybody, especially since we're a small enough community that if I run into somebody who's also interested, I want to make sure I've got the best opportunity free to talk for potentially with each other for a pretty lengthy amount of time. I'm going to be bringing my portable audio recorder and my video camera and my camera, my SLR, along with me. I don't know what PAX's policy and preparation is for recording and streaming, but I was surprised at Worldcon they did not provide much in the way of recording and streaming, and so I got the go-ahead to record the panels I was on, because otherwise there was no recording otherwise for most of them. It wasn't that it wasn't allowed, it's just that they didn't provide it. So
yeah, I don't think they provide anything except basic audio technical support types of thing.
Yeah,
but I have seen people stream and record. So
yeah, so I'm not going to try to stream live because that gets more complicated, but I'm going to at least try to record it and be able to share with everybody else to a wider audience. So, assuming they don't have a problem with it. But even if they don't let me do it for the panels, I've often ended up doing conversations and interviews with other people, and then those become things that are worth sharing. So, so that I'm leaving my schedule nice and open, so you and I will get a chance to talk. We'll be able to talk at length as you would like, as much as you would like.
Cool. Yeah, I only made time slots for a panel. The panels you're on. Another one. I think that's early Friday morning. So
great.
Yeah, I have the same approach to conventions, because you don't know quite what you're getting yourself into until you're there. So.
And I'm actually personally not a big fan of conventions. I don't mind being on the performance side. Again, I prefer to be behind the camera rather than in front of the camera. But when it comes to conventions, I'm not a big fan of the crowds and the lines and all of that stuff. So it's not something I would seek out personally. I only do it professionally. And so I figure the best use of it professionally then is the networking opportunities. And that seems to have worked okay. So other people, they love the press of the bodies and the excitement and everything else, and that's not my thing.
Yeah, I have a short limit for that as well, but I do like meeting people doing cool stuff. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I definitely do like that part. You could just do it without all the crowds.
Yes.
I know it's not the way it works, but that okay. Eric, how's your audio coming in now?
It should be good.
Okay, good. You can hear
Everything
us okay?
appears to be fine now.
Good. All right. That seems to have cleared it up. That is good. All right. So, Eric, I do have your, as I said, I started trying to read it, and I was having fever and medication delirium, so it wasn't doing great.
That is okay.
But let's take a look through it here. Do you have a newer revision you'd like to submit before I give feedback?
Unfortunately not. I grossly overestimated the amount of time I would have while at my parents' house this last week. So.
All right, because we want to get these released this week, preferably before I hit PAX. So
absolutely
2 days basically. So do you? Let's see. So we got the abstract, intro. Okay. So,
yeah, I have a little bit of everything on the page.
Sounds like somebody just joined us. With some background noise. Okay.
Yeah, I should have a couple hours the next few days that I'll be able to.
Well, that's all we have.
Into it.
That's all we have.
So it shouldn't be.
I know. I want to post these. I want to post these no later than Friday. So, because that's the 30th. Okay. So let's take a quick look at it. So basic abstract. You can take out the basic part, just have abstract. Or you could put summary if you wanted, or overview, whatever, but you don't need the basic part for abstract. This research examines the phenomena of bleed in relation with role-playing gaming. Bleed is the concept of the real self bleeding into a game character and vice versa. I was looking to find out how bleed, I'd probably go with affected players in general when in an RPG gaming scenario. Bleed introduction. Okay, your checklist there is needs a little cleanup. Body, negative bleed, the bleed you've heard of, positive bleed, the bleed you didn't realize existed. Ways people encounter bleed, the bleed you've experienced in each section. Ways to overcome negative bleed, the ways others have dealt with bleed. Outro and bleed outroduction. Okay. Let's see, sources. So I would put all references and sources at the very end under references.
Yes.
Okay. And remember, we're trying to use APA formatting, so keep that in mind. And
I had thought I had done those in APA.
No, that part, but you would put references rather than sources and put it at the end. So.
Okay, right.
Okay, inside a casual RPG that had. I hope you're taking notes because I'm giving you feedback.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. While sharing with the others here. Jonathan, you doing okay there?
Yep, sorry, I had to switch back to
Cellular? Okay.
cell tower, so.
Okay. Inside a casual RPG that had been running for 9 months, or fine, running fine for months, a deadly seed of dissent had been planted and nobody knew. There would be a catastrophic failure to contain emotions that would cause a friendship to fall apart. So I would probably take out the deadly part. That I get using the dramatics to catch interest, but might want to pull out the deadly part.
It's just clickbait.
Yeah, I know. let's tone that down just a little bit. It can still be fairly dramatic, because it was definitely, it sounds like it was a strong experience, but it wasn't deadly. Divisive and, many other things, but let's pull out deadly from that. There'd be a catastrophic failure to contain emotions that would cause a friendship to fall apart. From something said between the Dungeon Master in raised voice but still in character to a player's character, an emotional cascade triggered. Strong emotions, anger, confusion, and hurt flooded into the player's life. The only escape that player could find was simply abandoning the group, blocking all communication from their friends, and moving on in their life. This strong negative reaction is something most would consider isolated to the game itself. Shouldn't the game just end and everyone feels better? Let it go as if it never happened. If a game is just a game, then how can someone have a reaction like this? How is it that a game can affect us in our real life? The answer, quite simply, is a complex topic known as bleed. First thing that needs to be discussed is bleed itself. It is a concept I never really had a name for, that really did not exist to me until it was described. Bleed, as I will be discussing here, refers to the emotional, psychological, and physical states that can transfer between real life and fantasy. This fantasy could refer to a number of things, but here is referring to role-playing gaming. There are a couple kinds of bleed that will be discussed, negative and positive bleed, as well as some of the ways people have dealt with or encountered this phenomena. To better understand bleed, take a look at this diagram from an article focused on bleed in LARP, live action role-playing, from Bowman 2015. So there's the diagram there. And I recognize that diagram, the good old Bowman there.
I really like that diagram.
Yeah, no, this is her bailiwick, big time. As shown here, Jonathan, do you have a copy of this from Eric?
Yes, I do.
Okay, good. As shown here, when role-playing, there's an inherent distinction between the player, self, and the character. This is separated by an imaginary boundary known as the magic circle, which is created by the rules, identities, and occurrences within the game space. Bowman 2015. Now, when you're quoting that, isn't she quoting somebody else?
Oh.
Because I don't think magic circle's her invention. I thought she was quoting somebody else from that, from what I remember.
Well.
So just double check that that's a primary quote, or if it's a secondary quote, then you're actually supposed to reference the secondary source. There's a way to do that.
Right, and that's from an article.
Okay, if
she wrote, so I'll have to take a second look at that.
If she doesn't cite somebody else, then that's fine. But just double check that, because I thought Magic Circle, she was citing somebody else.
Oh yeah, she is.
Okay, so make sure you cite the person that she's citing for that.
Yes.
Okay. And APA tells you how to do that when you're doing a citation of a citation.
Okay.
The line in the center, the alibi, is the idea that doing things inside the game are a representation of the character, not the player's self. The idea of, quote, that was my character's choice, not mine, end quote. Bleed is therefore an interaction inside or outside of the game that causes this magic circle to be breached. It is anything from a moment of real-life empathy toward an NPC that was wrongfully slain to complete anger at another person for a betrayal that happened in their in-game persona. Let me check something here. Okay, just making sure I had audio. Okay. There. Let's see. And the reason why I'm reading it through is so I can just give you this feedback. I think this would just be the fastest way to do it, and it shares with everybody else here.
Yeah, it's totally fine with me.
Omar and Jonathan, if you want to interject, please do interrupt. If you hear something, I mean, we're not criticizing him right now yet on the grammar and such that needs to still be cleaned up. we're
Yeah, there's a
focusing
little
on
bit of cleanup.
we're focusing on the content and styling, the style. So, for example, cleaning up basic abstract to just abstract, changing sources down to the bottom using references, those kinds of bigger things that need to be addressed. He can tweak the grammar and such, between now and the final draft. But look for things as far as concepts or logical errors, or like I say, the citation issues, etc. You just want to help him get that feedback. Okay. Two major types. Okay, I lost my place here. I'm going to start. Okay, there are two major types of bleed that I want to quickly address. First, there's the kind of bleed that you're probably aware of, negative bleed. Negative bleed is the concept that something will bleed in or bleed out of a game and cause something bad to happen. The example given in the introduction, removing themselves not only from the game but from the real-life friend group entirely, is a very strong example of negative bleed. It is the kind of bleed that people unfamiliar with RPGs are afraid of. This includes ideas like playing a violent character will lead to an increase in real-life violence. Negative bleed, however, does not have to be this extreme. Negative bleed can happen in all sorts of scenarios, such as feelings of loss after a game, after losing a friend in game, playing a character lazily, not role-playing or not participating, when the real-life self is sick, or even feeling extra aggressive because of the shirt color your GM just happened to be wearing that day. Secondly, there's positive bleed. This kind of bleed is a little bit harder to see at first because it's not something that has been widely discussed or presented in media. This is the opposite counterpart of negative bleed. Positive bleed often occurs when learning something and taking it into or from the game. This could include anywhere from learning improved mathematics skills due to quickly adding or subtracting from dice rolls to learning to feel empathetic toward another person because you've lived their experience vicariously through a character. Positive bleed is the focus of many therapeutic RPG endeavors. The idea that people from all walks of life can better learn to control and anticipate the outcome of situations both in game and out in a safe and controlled environment is the point. So, and I would throw in the term sometimes called generalizing or generalization, because in the therapeutic world, you want people to take the skills that they learn in their therapeutic bubble and generalize them out into their daily life. So that would be a term you could throw into there. Jonathan, is there another term you could think of that would be a good applicable to that?
No, that sounds like probably the best wholesale option there.
Yep. Now, just because there are two types of bleed does not mean they're mutually exclusive. Every game session has the potential for both positive and negative bleed. Take this hypothetical example. A character experiences positive bleed in when their real-life self learns new techniques in physics. After declaring that they'd like to build a makeshift trebuchet to launch themselves over the enemy fortress, I had a player do that. And they feel elated that their calculations and trajectory has been found to be plausible. The rolls are in their favor, and their entire team is launched up over the wall, landing heroically inside enemy territory. Where did you get that example from, Eric?
I just sort of spouted this from my brain.
Great. I love it.
Just
that's awesome.
Random.
No, that's beautiful. Although, maybe too heroically. Their characters, and therefore themselves, forgot to consider what might result from landing after being catapulted. They all break various bones, and one even ends up unconscious from a missed landing. The party is utterly overwhelmed and defeated. Now, this may be a sort of extreme example. However, there are many paths available to bleed. On the negative end, players might feel ashamed about their lack of consideration. They may... I would change consideration. That has a different connotation.
Okay.
Lack of forethought or something else like that would be a better phrase for that, yeah. They may feel animosity toward the player whose original idea this was, or they may feel animosity toward the GM who they feel did not properly reward their creativity. On a positive end, even though the characters were defeated, they may more carefully consider the ramifications of their actions in the future. They may be happy to have carried out a cool idea even if it failed epically, or they could feel inspired to figure out how their GM will twist their actions the next time. The players could feel any or all of these examples of bleed at the same time, to varying degrees, even though some of these emotions seem contradictory. So I'll give you the anecdote related to that. So I had a player, he was a spellcaster of some kind. This was in a Middle-earth role-playing setting. And he was joining an already existing group. And that group was surrounded, this was up in near Gundabad in northern Middle-earth and such. So already they were in an old abandoned keep surrounded by orcs, just hundreds of them. You know, one group against, they were completely overwhelmed, but they were in the keep. And he wanted to join the party, and I'm like, oh boy, that's kind of hard to do. Like, how am I going to get him into the group when they're surrounded? You know, I had a little trouble figuring it out. And he's like, I've got the perfect idea. So he snuck in, got onto one of the catapults and launched himself, and then he cast the equivalent of basically levitate or feather fall on the downward part so that his landing was nice and smooth. Now, they almost filled him full of arrows as he came in, because his character had, on a scale of 1 to 100, this was Rollmaster, he had an appearance of 8. He looked uglier than a lot of the orcs. He was badly maimed and everything else, so they almost killed him incoming because they thought it was an attack, right? But he managed to convince them not to kill him as he levitated into the fortress there. But that was definitely a very different, and talk about a dramatic entrance for a character, right? So I love that. And I'm surprised they didn't think of, I guess this maybe in your mind, maybe it was a D&D group who doesn't really take into account, oh, we've got plenty of hit points, we'll be fine. If they calculated how many feet they fell and, oh, that's only this many D6, we'll be fine, we can take it. And maybe didn't take into account other things, maybe. I mean, just in your hypothetical scenario.
Right.
But I like it. Polish it a little bit, but I like it. It's humorous, so I'd say go with it. Anybody else want to comment on that so far? Omar?
No, I love the example.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it illustrates everything really well.
Good. All right. This is the major issue with defining bleed. Although every player may experience an action sequence in the same exact same manner, not every player will respond the exact same way. Something positive for one person may be profoundly negative for another. Martin, 2017, described a situation where he had a very strongly negative bleed reaction to pickup game. The situation, and that's where it's even more likely, really, in a lot of ways, is when you don't know people, you haven't established a relationship. The situation involved another player walking up to a cave with an NPC guard, and he cut him down without so much as a word. The author said he lost it a little and proceeded to get carried away by a wave of emotion. He self-admitted that his reaction was in large part due to his own convictions, although he also chose a character that aligned well with his ideals. He almost walked away from the table after trying to kill the other player's character to stop the slaughter, and then confronting the other player about his style of play, but was convinced to stay by the DM. He found the killing profoundly negative. The other player obviously did not. Luckily, there are a couple of other ways to maintain balance in game as well. In the previous example, the DM managed some fantastic story wizardry. So I assume you've got more content to wrap up there. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. I think you're off to a good start. Make some of those formatting changes, but let's get that pounded out because we need to get this live, and I need time to give you a more in-depth feedback on grammar and everything else so that it's more polished. So if we can really get that slammed out. Any questions you'd like us to address?
I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit too much, but now that you've read it out loud, I also feel I feel a little less worried.
Yeah.
I feel like it flows okay. It just needs more polish and to be finished.
Yep.
I'm basically going to wrap up with that example about managing that. Talk a little bit about how other groups deal with bleed, and a little bit about, I guess, RPG research and the ideas.
Okay, good. And
about positive bleed, and then wrap up. So.
Okay. And I would also
hoping it doesn't go too much longer.
It take as long as you need to on it, as long as you get it done and polished. But also put at the beginning a statement to the effect of, this is just a blog posting. and that it's your first one in a series that you'll be doing on different topics. This is not an in-depth research essay, though it may down the road become something more in-depth if time permits. So each of you, as you do your blog postings, have that little disclaimer at the beginning to just kind of set the expectation that this isn't going to go as deep as a detailed essay would or a full research report would. It's introducing or covering a topic not as in-depth as some of your other work will down the road. But it's a good starting point for conversation. So that it's a blog posting, it's not as deep as an essay, and it's a starting point for conversation, and you might in the future go into more depth, or you may cover other topics. But and it's the beginning of a monthly series of blog postings that you'll be making. So all of you will want to do that as you do your blog postings. Have that little disclaimer in italics or something for the first few blog postings. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I think you're off to a good start there, Eric. Just really get that finished up, and then let's get it polished and rounded up, and I think we'll have something really nice to put out there. And I'm hoping we'll get some great conversations going. So Amar, I know you've been down and out with everything. Did you have any progress since the last time we spoke?
Just research, and I know exactly the order that things are going to go.
Okay. How are you feeling functionally wise? Do you think you'll be able to get working on it today, or do you think it's going to be late for you because of your health?
I'm waiting till I can eat solid foods again.
That's understandable. That's understandable.
I can't really sustain doing much.
I'm empathizing because I'm supposed to finish the 30-page textbook chapter here for facilitation techniques in therapeutic recreation for Penn State, but I got so sick that the medication I take, the breathing treatments, it completely impair me cognitively. I can't keep all the variables in my head. So I made a lot of progress. I got it down from 90 pages down to 58 pages before I got too sick and medicated. And I'm hoping as I'm starting to lighten up the medication and the breathing treatments, my head's starting to clear, although I'm not there yet. I really wanted to get this done before I went to PAX because I'm going to be in Pennsylvania, and I'm like, I need to visit Professor DeZillo, and I want to be able to give him the draft, and now I'm not so sure. But I was going to share the outline with you guys at some point here. Jonathan, are you starting to think of what you'd like to do for next month for your blog posting? Did we just lose him? I think he just dropped.
Yeah, I think we might have.
Maybe.
Okay.
I do have to say that I will try to copy Eric's tone.
Okay.
His blog, because I really like the tone.
Yeah, no, that's exactly appropriate for a blog posting. It gets to be a little more lighthearted.
I was struggling finding a medium.
Yeah, blog postings can be lighter in tone and can have the humor and don't have to be as serious as a full-blown essay or research report.
It's almost hard to write with the tone I used. I'm like, I guess I should be talking to people, but
yeah,
I don't know, it feels weird.
A blog posting is meant to be a more personal connection with your community.
Yeah, just like so many years of college, they hammer in you never to do that.
Right.
It's like goes against basic
I know. But it's
right.
a great, because we want to draw people in, but that's why you want that disclaimer at the beginning to say very clearly this is a blog posting, not a formal essay. So it excuses that style and actually makes it more interesting to a wider audience. We want to get these concepts out to a broader populace than just other fellow researchers, but we also want to bring in researchers to have the topics discussed. But if you put that disclaimer in there, then people will cut you a little more slack. And then if you decide to do a more detailed essay, then yes, you can still have some humorous anecdotes, but you have to be careful about how you do that with the more formal research. I just think this is the best way to start with trying to get the community connected and for you guys to get to know each other a little better, and I think it's just a great way to start building the community back up. So, Omar, so let's go ahead. And we're gonna plan on yours being more next week rather than this week. That's okay if we release one blog posting this week and then another one next week. That's not such a bad thing if we stagger it a little. So hopefully your recovery goes quickly enough and we can do that. But I understand, medical things happen, so just do what you can. Don't hurt yourself, obviously.
No, I definitely should be able to do it. I can't imagine.
Okay.
If I'm sick any longer, I'll just go insane because I'm just so behind on everything.
Understood. So let's take the pressure off you and just get me your draft. Next Tuesday, let's have a draft to go through, and we'll just plan on posting yours at the end of next week. How's that sound?
Okay.
Okay.
That's really good.
And then
I'll try to get you my draft earlier if I can.
If you can, but don't knock yourself out over it. And that means we'll have one blog posting this week and another blog posting next week, and that's not a bad thing to have that flow. Because I would probably going to do it anyway, even if you guys had them already. I might still. You don't want to post on social network two competing content items simultaneously. You always want to stagger them a little bit. That's better for traffic and engagement. So, but we still have to set our timelines for you guys being done, and then I can queue them up into the system, and they can auto-publish as needed. So it'll work out. It'll be okay. Jonathan, are you back?
Yes, I am. Sorry about that.
No problem. I know how it is with the mobile thing. So have you had time to start thinking about a topic you would like to do for the December blog posting?
Yeah, I'm thinking about two. One is how social skills are facilitated using social learning theory in tabletop RPGs, and the other is a more general how RPG therapy works, as well as how therapy works, quote unquote, using relational frame theory, which is work by Stephen Hayes.
Mm-hmm.
I was hoping to be able to describe it in that framework, because I know that a lot of the strictly RPG research therapy stuff is very nascent. But I'm sure that you have data that I have not read or heard of that would be helpful to that. So.
Oh, yes. Oh, definitely. Not on that specific framework, but plenty of resources that you'll be able to tie in with that, yes. As you get through, so how far are you along on the checklist? You're saying you had a lot of videos to do, but you'd already gone through the reading, or what was? I didn't quite understand.
Yeah, I've finished all of the reading.
Okay.
Yeah, I just have several videos, including the archive of these meetings.
Okay, good. Well, then, since you're interested in the therapy side, as I said, next week I'm going to be updating that list to include the baseline recommended reading and viewing for educational and therapeutic game masters. So that should give you some great resources there. You can, of course, you should now, since you have www2 access, you'll at least have it's disorganized. Again, we're reorganizing it on the primary www website. But if you go in the upper right-hand corner search box on www2, or if you go to /research, it's broken down by topic. And then there's collections there that are based on keywords. And it's not perfect. There's a lot of stuff that gets lost. That's why I recommend also using the search box. So you start with the /research to look what's been collated already, curated already, and find what works there for you. And then also hit the search box for anything that might not have been tagged yet, but shows up under keywords. So give that a shot, and that should help you. According to Google, the www2 website has around 3,800 unique content items. So one essay, could be many pages. That's just one content item. And that's how much is floating around. And that's accounting for duplicates. So with duplicates, it's more around 4,600 because we've got too many duplicates of some stuff. But there's 3,800 unique content items on that server. It's just a matter of weeding through. And again, we're trying to improve the means of finding those things on the new server, but we only have about 400, 500 or so on the new server so far. It's going to take a long time because that's 14 years of accumulated stuff on the old server.
Right.
So, but hopefully that'll help you define. Now, again, there's no reason you can't have two topics as two different blog entries, and we could publish one, this year, during December, and then the next one could be early in January, and you're welcome to post as many as you want. If people wanted to post weekly, they would be welcome to do so, but most people are too busy, so that's why we're only doing one a month, since it's a volunteer basis and not paid. I figure that's a reasonable amount.
Yeah, one of the, issues I've had is navigating to find some of the more empirical resources. I know that you have hospitals and clinics and things give you studies or study reports that they've done that aren't public media, but I don't know. So I'm kind of curious to know how much more information so if I were to search all of the databases I have access to, empirical studies or even empirical explorations of RPG tabletops as group therapy would be, like 3 or something, and half of them would be so old that no one's using that same language anymore. So
that is a challenge on the older ones. So yeah, the biggest problem. So for example, back in 2004, when I first started doing the research, there were only 60 research studies that were of research quality, but they were mostly meta-analysis and correlative. And there were only a handful, very small, controlled studies, as you say, just a few, and then mostly case studies. So they were meta-analysis, correlative case studies, and then a very few causal. And that's what started, when I started this as the RPG research project, I kept saying over and over and over, the primary goal is to try to develop more causal, research information. And now since that time, more studies have been coming out. It's kind of a trickle, but between, and again, it depends on which RPG format you're talking about. So remember, because we cover all 4 formats between tabletop, live action, computer-based, and solo adventure books and modules. There's been 0 on solo adventure books and modules as far as I know of. I would like that to change at some point.
Sounds like an easy fix for bibliotherapy.
Yeah, well, and I've done it in private practice and seen great results, but that's not technically a controlled study, so those become case studies and promising, but need further research, which my private practice has triggered a lot of that, and I'm limited in what I can publish on that because they're not IRB type studies, so I have to be very careful about abstracting out the information sufficiently if I'm going to talk about a previous client or something. But the good news is starting in about 2006, we started seeing here and there studies starting to come out that were trying to do more controlled, with control groups, and they're still small sample sizes. They tend to still only be between 12 to 30 participants, but that seems to be kind of the standard these days due to budget and everything else. So it's growing, but it is definitely slow. Kohei Kato, I think I mentioned him before. I don't know if you've come across his work yet. He's a Japanese PhD student, but he did a nice study back, I think, in 2014 or 2016, a good controlled study with Autism Spectrum youth using role-playing games, and then he used multiple measures, but one of the key ones was quality of life based on some other assessment tools, and he laid out some good numbers, did some controls. It's not perfect study, but it's one of the better ones out there that was trying to establish, he established a baseline, exposed them to the activities, then, tested them further and showed significant, at least 0.4 or better improvement in scoring. So that should be pointed to in our database. I don't know if it's in the university databases or not. He's been touring for a couple of years showing these numbers, and he gave me copies of some of his research. So if you have trouble finding it publicly or in your databases, let me know and I'll dig it up or contact him again. He does speak primarily Japanese, so most of his stuff's in Japanese. So some of it I had to translate for him, but That's a good one for autism spectrum for quality of life was the target he was going on,
Okay.
which is multiple, which is multivariate, right? Because quality of life takes into a lot of different areas. And I'm pretty sure I blog posted about several times, so you can get pointed to him. There are multiple studies about trait-based aggression and screen time of video games and role-playing games. About 6 different studies from the neuroscience perspective, doing brain imaging and such. So, because what comes up a lot I run into a lot of clients that one of their first questions after they get past the D&D is against my religion thing is, well, it has violence. Isn't this modeling further violent behavior? And fortunately, just in the last 5 or 6 years, there have been 6 different studies talking about this. Now, they tend to be more focused on the screen side of role-playing gaming and or just video games in general. So some of it's extrapolative of what they're finding. But one of the key things that glommed onto, so 2 key things I found from these 6 different studies, 1 to 2 hours of screen time, research across the board, multiple studies seems to support is good for you with video games. Whether it's Tetris, whether it's Mario Kart, or whether it's a role-playing game, you get benefits from it. After about an hour or so, 45 minutes, an hour or so, some people's 2 hours, different thresholds, but average about an hour a day, the deficits start to kick up, and that's higher stress hormones leading to weight gain, more aggressive behavior, things like that. All those things start to accumulate if you start playing longer than an hour or 2 a day. And that seems to be steadily holding up between study after study after study. In recreation therapy, which most recreation therapists are kind of anti-screen, though the younger generation's more open to things like Wii and such. And I've always been a pro-technologist, but also taking it with realizing that doesn't mean it can solve everything. But we as recreation therapists for decades have said to limit screen time because of this, and this. And so it's nice to see on the neuroscience side some additional, harder research coming out about that. But what has also come out as an ancillary to that is exposure to video game violence. Also, let me say that the benefits are usually based on Tetris or shooters or Super Mario or a role-playing game. And the role-playing game, because it has more complexity going on, especially if it's a social interaction one, you potentially, if there's less of that high adrenaline, then potentially the screen time exposure seems to be less of an issue to a point. But still, you're only talking 2 hours instead of 1 hour, right? It's double the time without deficit. But so I just generally say 1 to 2 hours of screen time a day benefits. After 2 hours a day, you start to the deficits outweigh the benefits, and that's been how I've kind of summarized those studies. But what was interesting also, and has come out again mostly on video game studies, but I think we can extrapolate, is trait-based behavior related to exposure to violence and aggression, and then the expression of aggression. Because everybody likes to go back to the Bobo the Clown's example of behavior modeling from the 70s, which I'm sure you're more than familiar with. Eric and Omar, you guys are familiar with, right? I've talked with you guys about it before.
Oh, Bobo the Clown.
That's where they
it's a big clown doll.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
an adult punches or hits with a hammer this punch down doll. This is back in the 70s. And then they either watch it in person or on a video or through a window or whatever the method was, it varied. And then they send the kids into the room. And then the control group that didn't see the video, the kids didn't walk up and punch the clown. Whereas the kids who did watch the video walk up and punch the clown and they go, see, that means, this is modeling violence and kids will be more violent. So this is all about television violence and all of that way back then. That is what people love to cite all the time. The problem is, it's way more nuanced than that, and that doesn't automatically lead to everybody, automatically becoming violent murderers and etc. But people who are strongly opposed to any violence. So here's part of the problem. A lot of the people who've been pushing the anti-violence on television have been highly questionable sources. For example, Thomas Radecki. It used to be Dr. Thomas Radecki. was the person who formed the National Council Against Television Violence in the late 70s, early 80s. And he was also one who partnered up with Patricia Pulling from Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons back in the 80s. And they would lobby Congress and everything. And he's part of the reason why we now have all of the labels for television shows, TV 13, mature, etc., etc. They lobbied that for a long time. They tried to do the same thing with role-playing gaming. That one didn't catch on, putting labels on the role-playing games saying this could make you commit suicide or cause homicide, etc., etc. Fortunately, they didn't do that. And the same people, the similar people who got the labels put on video games, etc., etc. So, Radecki was a psychiatrist who was repeatedly called on misrepresenting himself on his credentials, and in the early to mid-90s had his license revoked in one or more states, or suspended, for some number of years. He eventually got it back, and then in the 2000s, he was put under investigation again, had his licenses revoked everywhere, and in 2016 was imprisoned because it turned out for over 20 years he'd been trading sex for drug prescriptions. He was a drug mill, giving out drugs to people in trade for sex. This is one of the main people that has helped push this anti-violence thing. So, and his research studies were heavily flawed. I say research in quotes, but these people had a big influence on the pop culture side, and did trigger a lot of conversations about these topics. But as I said, a lot of them like to cite this research from back in the 70s with Beau in the Cloud. What the more recent research is showing is a more nuanced perspective, which makes a lot more sense, that you're going to have people with different traits who, exposed to different stimuli, are going to have different responses. And people that score high as a baseline on trait-based aggression are more likely, after viewing or having modeled for them aggressive behavior, are more likely to act on that modeling shortly thereafter in more aggressive ways, and might show a longer term consequence to that. However, those who aren't scoring high on the trait-based aggression are not going to, it's not going to stick. They might, oh, well, that looks like fun, I'll give that a shot, but it's not going to stick, it's not going to generalize, you're not going to see an increase in their aggression throughout the days, weeks, months, years. So that's an important nuance that needs to be brought up for people. And it is something when we work with at-risk youth populations, we bring into account. And, like Montessori schools, they really don't like violence. They're pretty adamant about it. So, for example, when we did the LARP, we weren't allowed to let them do any violent contact with each other. We let them use their imaginations and pretend foes with their boffers and such. But basically, that was about as far as we could take that. And with the tabletop stuff, they were concerned, so we instead had them play No Thank You Evil, which is a extremely low and non-bloody violence. It's very little. You're shooting things like bubble guns and things like that. It's it's meant for 5 years old on up. And also why we've been researching Doctor Who RPG and use the other RPGs besides D&D, because they have built-in behavior modification and consequences for choosing violent course of action versus non-violent. Are any of you familiar with the Doctor Who RPG?
I think you briefly discussed that it advocates that no violence, that you can solve problems without using violence or resorting to that sort of thing.
Okay. Correct. Omar and Jonathan, did you have any previous exposure?
Actually, yeah, but because it's England, I lived in England, and
right.
Anything Doctor Who related is a little bit popular.
Okay. Did you play the role-playing game at all?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I've heard some.
What's that, Jonathan? I keep losing them. I'm reconnected.
It is interesting about the violence thing, because I can only think of one video game, period, that doesn't use violence, where you can finish the game without using violent means.
Yep.
Undertale?
Yeah, that's literally it. Oh, and Mirror's Edge. That's it.
I can give you a few more. I can give you at least one more.
Well,
That Dragon Cancer.
Its purpose has to have no violence.
What's that?
Like, I'm not counting things like so games that have the option of violence and no violence usually will make you kill someone.
Right. Yeah, and we always provide options in our games, whether it's D&D or anything else, that creative solutions can win out.
What games were you going to say?
That Dragon Cancer is a highly emotional role-playing sort of game. It's not quite. It's more like a branching narrative. It's pretty hardcore. It's about a parent's struggle with their baby's struggle with cancer. It's based on a true story, but it's a video game, and it's a real. It pulls at your heart, but it's a very people. You watch the clips on it, and people are just in tears after watching the game. It's it's distinctive from other games. It's more of an emotional, just roller coaster. But that Dragon Cancer. Jonathan, are you back? Oh my goodness! Come on, Jitsi, cooperate.
Now, does that game have the option for violence?
No, not really. That's what I say. It's like the other extreme where it doesn't really. Jonathan, are you back?
Yes, I am.
Okay. You have any familiarity with the Doctor Who role-playing game?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. I believe you talked about it.
Okay.
So,
yeah. So we look at all these other options, but even with D&D, we always try to modify any of the adventures we present that people can solve it through a non-violent action. So, for example, if you look at one of our Game Master training evaluation baselines from back in, I think it was July, GM Jen, she ran Lost Mines of Phandelver, which is the introductory adventure for D&D 5th edition, which generally tells you to go in and kill all the goblins. The group did take out a few of the goblins, but over time the group became less and less violent, and we were the players, and she had never experienced players like us before. And she wanted to try a different approach too. So we ended up negotiating with the goblins rather than having to kill them all off. And it was done in a fun, we all had a good time, it was fun, there was a lot of humor to it too. But ended up not having to slaughter all the goblins, which is, the only time I've seen Lost Mines of Phandelver go that way. But it's an illustration of how you can take any scenario, and as long as the game master is willing to be flexible about how you achieve your outcome. Because the goal was stop the goblins from raiding the roads and the villages nearby, stop for resources. So instead, let's negotiate a trade deal instead. And let's find some other solution to their problem is they need resources. How do we address that? And but it takes a little creativity and making it clear to the players that you don't have to kill them all. You may need to defend yourself. The world can be tough, and you may have to do that. But let's consider other options here. So even with D&D, which doesn't have that behavior modification built in, as a game master, you can modify adventures to be able to have a less lethal approach and less violent approach. With Adventures of Middle-earth and the Wandering Role-Playing Game, of course, they've got shadow points so that if you do engage in violence, it has to be quote-unquote justified from a more classic Victorian, good versus evil perspective. So, good and evil is much clearer cut, which we found handy for working with at-risk youth and such, giving them more clearly defined parameters rather than the grayness of relative morality is a lot more effective with them. It helps them, having clearly defined parameters really helps them with their behavior modification. Making things really abstract and open-ended when they really don't have a good grasp of appropriate behavior and inappropriate behavior, or maybe they have some grasp of it, but they don't have the practice of the self-control. We found these games to be really effective in helping with that, quite dramatically. I mean, even in a single session, we've had some remarkable experiences with players just changing completely their play style. They came in planning to be murder hobos, and within 45 to 90 minutes of a single session, it completely altered their play style to the more quote-unquote heroic approach. I love this work because I see these dramatic impacts that are just, life-changing in such a positive way. Of course, we have to help them process through that because sometimes it is such a dramatic experience. They can be a little overwhelmed by the emotion and such, but it's pretty neat. So, but anyway, the key thing there is talking about the trait-based factors related to aggression and exposure to aggression. And so knowing your population that you're working with. And so when you're doing therapy with different populations, some populations, it's an issue that you need to be concerned about. Other populations, it doesn't really, that's not the primary focus. So for example, I've got a couple of case studies I have a couple of previous clients that were, their panic disorder and anxiety disorders were so severe they had full agoraphobia, they would not leave their apartments, etc. Had everything delivered, friends and family had to bring them everything, and they just wouldn't leave. And then through basically equivalent exposure therapy, but using role-playing gaming, starting with solo adventure books and modules, and then a solo computer game, and then online safe role-playing game, and then coming to my offices and observing and then participating, and then slowly escalating them to a public game and then participating in the game. And now, short version is they were able to generalize that. They now go to the store, they use the bus, and some of them are actually running games in public venues 1 or 2 times a week. So huge improvement. There were no indicators that they're participating in a game that had violence like Dungeons & Dragons and such was going to be an issue for them. They were not going to become more violent or anything like that. That wasn't something I was concerned about with these particular individuals. When we work with these at-risk youth, though, who either incarcerated, they're through juvie, juvenile hall and such, or mental health, or they're part of gang violence, things like that, we want to try to give them alternatives to those perspectives. And so that's where we would choose different games and different play styles to help them consider other alternatives to violence as a means of problem solving. So it's definitely critical to know, your client, know your audience is what I say all the time. So there's a few of those studies out there. There's a couple of studies, some are older and some are newer. One's from like 94, but then there's one from 2016 on empathy and gamers. And what that shows is the tabletop gamers, I don't think they included LARP, but I think it would be applicable. But the tabletop gamers scored high in empathy, whereas the computer-based gamers scored lower on empathy between these studies. So there's a lot of different... Luckily, as I said, since 2006, they've been starting to see an influx of new studies. And now, the last few years... Oh, we just lost Jonathan again. But the last few years, we're seeing a lot more studies coming in that are getting better and better quality. So... Oh, I wish we could do something about his connection.
I mean, it wouldn't be an RPG research meeting without someone disconnecting repeatedly.
Well, I mean, we're trying to do this at an international level, so that's the trade-off.
It's been feels like it's slowly been getting better.
Well, I've been tweaking the infrastructure, yeah, but this is on his end, and I can't do a whole lot about that.
Oh, and I wanted to ask, can you send me an email real quick on
right. Yeah, you were saying there was a problem with the email. That's a good question.
Well, I wasn't sure, because it just seems odd to me that I haven't received anything in over a week, because there's usually pretty, not a huge flow, but a steady flow of stuff. So.
Yeah, but I've been sick, so it's possible. But here I'm sending it right now from my Gmail account.
I just got concerned, so
you should be, because until I've made the switch over from the shared hosting to the VPS, the email is not reliable, unfortunately. Okay, I just sent you a test from Gmail.
Okay.
So, shouldn't take too long. Welcome back, Jonathan.
Yep, sorry about that. I'm walking around campus, so we're going to be switching routers
Oh, goody.
So yeah, this will be happening, but I'm coming back each time.
Okay. So the good news is, just even the last few years, there's been a rapid increase on better and better research. It still needs to keep improving, but we really are seeing an uptick. Thank goodness. A lot of the only problem is not all of these are showing up in the university databases. Some are, some aren't. So you have to be able to look at other sources like the IJRP, the International Journal of Role Playing, Weird Con Companion, and other sources like that are open journals that don't always end up in the databases because they're not paid for, so they don't get into the bundle. And also, I get individual submissions from master's theses and doctoral theses from individuals that have submitted documents to me over the years from their own research. So, yeah, the databases are a good starting point, but what I found for this line of study, that an awful lot is being missed if you rely only on the university database subscriptions. So that's why I've tried to aggregate it on our site as best as possible. And the good thing is, for these individual submissions, those are usually ones I can publish publicly, as opposed to the ones that are from a journal where they end up holding the copyright, and even though the author wants it to be public, they can't because of the journal contract. So, it's an interesting challenges there. But
right.
Yeah, there unfortunately is, the last, as I said, from 2006 onward, a steadily increasing flow of better and better research. Still needs to get a lot better than it is, but it is getting there. But you have to find it from a lot of different sources, and again, that's why I've tried to aggregate it on our servers, because otherwise it takes forever. And as we're moving everything from the old server to the new one, we're a little dated as well. Our current snapshot kind of stops around 2016. I have stuff that's as recent as this year that I need to add to the new server, and I still need to go out and grab some new content. I've got a lot of bookmarks of stuff I found recently, because every time I delve into something, I always do fresh searches on all my resources, and I keep finding new stuff. But sometimes it requires just a wide open web search to find some obscure materials, because again, this doesn't get good funding. It's only recently that universities have started accepting these as for people's dissertations and such. So a lot of them don't end up in the main database system. So you have to dig pretty deep.
Yeah, I've been sort of recommended against doing something like that for my dissertation. Not in a draconian way, but I think one of the issues is, if the bulk of the literature is in rec therapy, it doesn't justify a degree, a PhD in counseling psychology. They really want the bulk of your literature to come from the field. So
I understand.
That seems to be the reaction I've garnered.
Right. Well, so the good news is, there's the only research that comes from rec therapy is the stuff I've been doing. Because there are no rec therapists that have done this research prior to me. So all of the other research comes from other fields. So I reference a lot of recreation therapy. When I'm trying to cover a topic, a particular theory, I may reference recreation therapy. Because remember, I come from a research psychology, neuroscience, and recreation therapy background, and music therapy background. So I'll reference any of those areas. But the recreation therapy being the ideal fit for the profession, for private practice, and insurance companies will pay for it, etc. There is zero research from a recreation therapy perspective on role-playing games. Nobody else has done that yet, until this year. So while I was on the road trip tour, somebody called me from, where is she? I think in Virginia. She's doing but she's only an undergraduate, but she's doing her big capstone research project on role-playing games from a recreation therapy perspective, and got approval from the university to do that. And so she interviewed me for a couple hours, and has interviewed other people and brought in other sources. So that's the first independent one that I'm aware of, and that's only, as I say, at the bachelor's level. But yeah, there isn't anything on role-playing gaming in recreation therapy by itself, but there's lots of theoretical concepts from rec therapy that are perfectly applicable to why role-playing games would have these benefits, because you can extrapolate a lot of these things. But yeah, otherwise it's going to come from psychology and social psychology and psychiatry and neuroscience. Those are the ones that we're having to cite. And again, there's an increase in all of that. But yeah, what you've experienced is not unusual. I've had a number of people working on their master's or doctoral thesis contact me saying, I want to do this as my dissertation, but the university's pushing back, and can you help me with that? And I have been able to help. If some people have been able to go on, we've been able to give them enough sources that they've gotten the approval to do it, and some have gone on and gotten their degrees going through that process. So it is out there, but it definitely takes some extra digging. So, but yeah, I'll gladly help you with trying to find sources for your blog stuff as you get that solidified. And again, start with on www2 using the /research focused page. Start with that, and then use that search box and glean what you can from there. See if you can find any sources that you didn't previously come across. And then I have, as I said, a whole bunch still on my laptop that I need to upload. And when I get back from PAX, I'm going to be, wrapping up the textbook. So I'm going to have a lot of this stuff will be fresh in my, I'll have fresh sources to add. And B, I've got to finish working on the publication at the end of the month, end of December, on the RPG Professionals Handbook. So I'm going to have that many more sources available added to the database that'll be much more up to date with just the last few years. Because most of our snapshot stops around 2016 right now on the old server, and then the new server is starting to have the newer 2017, 2018 material added to it. So we're in a state of flux here, but in the long run, it's going to all pan out to be a lot better. It'll be a lot easier to navigate and be a lot cleaner and have the duplicates gone and have standard formatting, etc. Because I have you guys to help instead of just being one person trying to do an overwhelming task. So.
I keep thinking, man, I gotta finish my blog post, but also we have all that stuff to keep moving over.
We do, but let's get the blog post done this week for you, and then you can switch gears back to that. Because remember, it was part of that process, is part of what also triggered your topic for your blog post, which is always hope. So that's okay. As long as we keep, I'm in it for the long haul here. I've already been focusing on this therapeutic research side for coming up on 15 years. And I'm planning to be in this for decades, so I can be patient as long as we keep making progress, as long as every week we're chiseling away at it. That's the way I got this done. Some of it took many months to get anywhere, but if we just keep at it, it'll keep getting better. And with more people, of course, we can do that much more, and we bring in the community with the blog posts and such. Jonathan, is there anything you wanted to ask or discuss before I switch to reading the outline from the upcoming textbook chapter?
No, I think that about covers it for the time being.
Okay.
In the next 2 weeks, I'll be able to really start grinding.
Okay.
So.
Good. Yeah, and you'll have Christmas break coming up soon here.
Yes, much needed.
Yes. So. Oh yeah, it always is. All right, so this is, it's still in a rough shape, and I've really got to get it cleaned up. But, so the source I got from 90 pages down to 58 pages, and I have to get it down to 30 pages, based on the specific font and sizing and all of that, for the textbook Facilitation Techniques in Therapeutic Recreation by Professor John Datillo and a PhD, and Alexis McKinney, EDD, through Penn State. That's for the upcoming edition of that book. I think I've summarized before, there's two versions. There's two books that all recreation therapists have to pick from if they're working towards their certification to cover this particular topic. This is a required class. When you apply for your certification, your CTRS, they do a checklist of, did you take these classes, cover this material, or do you have X number of years experience with this population, etc. And there's only two books to choose from for this particular one on facilitation techniques. So one is here from Washington State by Norma J. Stumbo and Brad Wardlaw, Facilitation of Therapeutic Recreation Services, an evidence-based and best practice approach to techniques and processes. And that is what here at Eastern Washington University, the head of the TR department, Professor Emily Messina, currently uses in her program. And part of that is because that's what was already being used when she took over the program from Professor John Cogley, who built the program at EW. And although this one looks like they did use a Pennsylvania publisher. That's interesting. And then the other one is this one from Penn State. And so out of all the programs out there, all the students and such, every professor has to choose between these two books. One or the other is what gets to be for the class. Professor Messina is going to switch to the Datillo book when this RPG therapy chapter is added. So that's awesome that she'll be switching to that when it finally happens. And that'll be that many more people that will finally be exposed to RPG therapy as a concept. So that's very exciting. Just got to get it finished. So here is, I'm going to go through the few concepts, get a little feedback from you guys to narrow down a few things and some of the outline. And then if we have time left, we'll continue our Robin's Laws of Good Game Mastering, but thought you guys would want to be in the loop on this. So section classification could fit under physical activity and fitness for LARP, or emotional expression and control for tabletop, LARP, or computer-based, or cognitive stimulation and well-being for all 4 RPG formats, and then for educational adaptation strategies under all 4 formats. So these are the different categories that are in the book. There's some interesting parallels with some of the existing chapters in the book on adventure therapy and let's see what's not on the list on that. Where did I put that overlap list? I had a little list of it. Adventure therapy, expressive arts therapy, and therapeutic use of play. There's content in those chapters that heavily overlap with the concepts in RPG therapy. So this is also that I finally got it into the format so he gave me a free copy of the 3rd edition book and said, format your content. Don't use the second. I'd already formatted it to the 2nd edition. He says reformat it to the 3rd edition because this is what we're using close to for the 4th edition. So it's finally now fitting the new format, because I had a very different approach where I start with the history to dispel all the myths and such, and then ramp up from there. But their format is very different. They actually do the history towards the end. So I've had to rework a lot of the flow, and it's been a challenge just to get it in a different way. So one of the beginning part starts with a quote, and I've got 3 quotes I'm wrangling with. I might proffer all 3, but I want to see which one you guys like the best. They start more abstract and kind of a big picture, and then it gets more and more specific and narrow. And these are 3 quotes I really like that I think apply in different ways. So the first one is, and you may have heard some of these before, "He who receives an idea from me receives instruction himself without lessening mine, as he who lights his taper at mine receives light without darkening me." Anybody know who that is?
Thomas Jefferson.
You got it.
I learned something.
I'm a big
I like that quote too, though.
I do too, yeah. I'm a big open source advocate. I think that the sharing of knowledge, when you share what you know with others, doesn't take away from you and helps benefit others. And, and not only does it apply in sharing your research and sharing your practice approaches and such, because there's a lot of people hoarding of knowledge that I think hurts this profession a lot. But also at the game. When we do a role-playing game, we're the game master is sharing these ideas and concepts with the other players, and they're sharing back. There's a lot of that sharing and that lighting each other's taper, lighting each other's candle as we get into this story that lights up the whole table, if you will. And so for me, that it has multiple layers of application. But I know that that's kind of an abstract thing that other people aren't going to necessarily go there. But that's why, for multiple reasons, I feel it's of value. Somebody about to say something?
No.
Okay.
Sometimes I breathe hard.
Okay.
But
me too right now. Just next one. Just participating in play in general significantly shapes the brain, opens the imagination, and invigorates the soul. Anybody know who that is? Okay. That's Stuart Brown, MD. The book is just simply called Play. And of course, you can see how that applies to role-playing gaming. Finally, when you master role-playing gaming, you become immersed in an activity that is peerless among leisure time pursuits. Anybody know who that is?
Nope.
Okay. That is Gary Gygax from his book Role-Playing Mastery. So, do any of those resonate for any of you? And if so, how? And which ones? Eric?
The first one, I like, because I agree, I really like the idea of, you're not hurting anybody by sharing your knowledge. And
Okay.
it makes us all brighter. I just like the concept of it.
Omar?
Yeah, I also think the first one. Something about the sharing of knowledge feels like it just makes things a million times better, and there's almost no drawbacks to it. I don't know why you wouldn't share.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I think that's 3 for 3. I think that captures the spirit of this research and also your kind of research. I like the Gygax quote. I don't think it's true, but I don't know that it necessarily captures the enlightenment spirit that the priest does.
And again, if they'll let me post all 3 quotes because they're short, I'll have all 3 included in the chapter. But if I have to pick one, I'm getting feedback from others about what resonates the most. So what's interesting is, so you guys like the first one the most. The group I talked to yesterday, most of them liked the second one the most. Most of them said the third one felt a little, although it was from somebody who actually met Gygax and knows Gygax's personality, who felt like it was a bit, what was the word he used? Not preening, but, I can't remember. But basically self-congratulatory, a little pompous. He was a little negative about it because it was Gygax and he realized it was Gygax. And so he had some, preconceived notions about who it was coming from. Because of the peerless, he felt it was being kind of, I'm trying to think of the word, but you get the idea. A little arrogant and touting its own horn, etc. Tooting its own horn. So he was a little negative about that one. But the other group was mostly like the second one because of the applicability of the play. And again, for me, it's kind of drilling down. Like all 3 of these concepts are very important, related to why we do what we do. What RPG research is about and what RPG therapy is about, etc. So if I can have all 3, great. If I have to pick one, I'll figure that out. But I'm trying to get feedback on how it impacts other people, just to see between different audiences what that's going to be like. So thank you for your feedback. I appreciate that. So introduction, it assumes you're either a recreational therapy student or experienced therapeutic recreation professional, but have little to no prior experience with any role-playing game format. Role-playing games, RPGs, have received considerable and controversial coverage since their creation in 1974. And there are many associated myths, but the body of research indicates significant benefits for those individuals and groups that participate in the various role-playing game formats: tabletop, TRPG, live action, or LARP, solo adventure books and modules, SABM, and computer-based CRPG. The research indicates powerful educational and therapeutic benefits for many populations just from the diversionary participation in RPG, and newer research is promising regarding structured therapeutic implementations. RPGs furthermore map very closely to therapeutic rec/recreation therapy goals and methodologies, and fill a critical gap in the dearth of cooperative TR activities compared to the plethora of competitive activities. It is generally agreed there need to be far more cooperative activities that achieve intrinsic motivation for participation available to a wider range of populations in a broader range of settings. This chapter provides you with definition and brief summaries of each RPG format, an initial overview regarding the creation and evolution of role-playing games, review of existing literature on their inherent educational and therapeutic effects, the populations most likely to benefit from participation, and a few examples of the modifications necessary to create targeted educational and therapeutic programs for specific populations and client goals. RPG could be considered by some the most complicated recreational activity available, especially since it has such a rich variety of knowledge domains upon which it derives and thrives. And so then I mentioned, again, from the same book, the overlap with adventure therapy, expressive arts therapy, therapy use play, but also some of the connections with Gestalt therapy, drama therapy, psychodrama, etc. Touch on topics about expanding interpersonal trust, accessing playfulness, experiencing spontaneity, being open to creativity, broadening sensory, emotive, and movement expressiveness, and co-creating new realities with others. Game theory refers to this cooperative role-playing as a non-zero-sum game. Participants are able to experience overcoming challenges and achieving successes without it being at the cost of fellow players. So I'm not going to read the rest of that, but you get the idea. So then the next, after the introduction, I have to do definitions. So I don't get to put the definitions at the end. I have to define all the terms that a student recreation therapist might not know that I'm going to be using throughout this chapter. And that's a lot of terms because I'm bringing in so recreation therapists get a little bit of everything. They get a holistic background in physical therapy and neuroscience and psychology and mental health and rehab and geriatric and pediatric, and get a whole exposure to a wide range. And then different recreation therapists, as they go into their careers, tend to find areas that they specialize in, or they go on to the master's level or doctorate level and do it there. And but the assumption here is these are they had 2 years of general school. They've had to have taken Psychology 101 and a few other things, but excuse me, they're in their first of 2 years of their major on TR, so they may not have all the terminology. And I've been surprised, even meeting with some of the certified recreation therapists, although some of them hadn't taken the cert in a long time. They've just been doing CEUs to stay current. That some of the things I bring up, like Avedon interaction patterns and Tuckman's small group formation theories and such, that they had little to no memory of, even though it was required for them to even get certified. It didn't come up for them in their daily practice, and so there's a lot of terms I have to define because I reference so many different domains. So I'm going to just kind of read through. There'll be a couple that I'll give you the definitions, but I'm just going to read the terms that I believe I'm going to have to define, and it's part of why my page count is so high. Where I can, I'm going to try to see if I can reference the ones that are already defined in the existing book, if he'll let me do that. I don't know yet if he'll let me do that. He does it in the last chapter. He has a chapter in here of his own, and he references some of the other chapters. So I'm hoping I can model that. But here's some of the terms that are being defined and used in this chapter. Active approaching, active engagement, activities including risk, ADHD, adjourning from Tuckman, adventure module from role-playing gaming, amygdala, aphantasia, aphasia, archetype versus stereotype, associative knowledge, associative play, attendance versus participation versus engagement, Avedon interaction patterns, casual gamer, that's a player archetype, campaign setting, cognitive neuropsychology, cognitive play stages, competence, competitive games, confidence, construction play, cooperative games, cooperative play, cues, that's a neuroscience reference for neuropsychology learning, deep level processing, more neuroscience, directive play therapy, diversional RPG. So this is where I define three styles of engagement with RPG. There's diversional RPG, which is what most people do when they just play with their friends, right? Or you go to a game store and play your game there. It's the standard form without a therapist or other professional oversight or supervision. And it's just diversional. Hand the books to somebody and let them play the game for fun, just diversional recreation. Then later we talk about therapeutic RPG and then RPG therapy, and those are the three different things I have to define in this chapter in more depth. Desirable difficulties, distinctiveness, distributed practice / differential learning, divided attention, drum circle. I have to define what a drum circle is because a lot of people have misconceptions about what a drum circle is. It is not a bunch of hippies necessarily. It doesn't mean it's excluded, but it is not just a bunch of hippies getting stoned and doing 60s peace love out around a bunch of drums. There's a lot of different uses of drum circles. And so I have to define that so people don't misconstrue what I mean when I say we use drum circles as part of our programs integrated with role-playing gaming. Dungeon Master DM, Dyscalculia, Dysgraphia, EF, Executive Functions, Elaboration, that's a neuroscience reference, Emotional Kick, I'm actually taking that from what? You guys should remember that one.
The good GM, why can't words? The guide for the handbook for good GM thing that we've been reading.
Go ahead, Omar. Omar, you were talking?
I'm sorry?
Oh, was that you or was that Jonathan who was trying to talk?
Oh no, I was just trying to say it's the handbook.
Yeah, it's Robin's Laws of Good Game Mastering.
Yeah, that one.
Why did I think it was called a handbook?
No, it's not the handbook. It's Robin's Laws of Good Game Mastering. Anyway, I like his term emotional kick, so I'm thinking about integrating that. Encoding and encoding specificity principle, engagement, exploration, fantasy, flow, as in Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, forming, Tuckman, free choice, frontal cortex, game master GM, games with rules, genre, hippocampus, icebreaker, interconnectedness, immersion, interesting, this is in a neuroscience perspective, interference, neuroscience, locus of control, internal, external, mass learning, modules, see adventure module, motivation, extrinsic or intrinsic, motivating from a neuroscience perspective, negative affect, narrative technique, neuroscience, neuropsychology, non-player character NPC, norming, Tuckman, participation versus mere attendance and full immersion engagement, parallel play, performing, Tuckman, play, player character PC, positive affect, PTSD, prior knowledge, processing, play as therapeutic medium, non-directive play therapy, Tuckman's group dynamics, RPG. Okay, so then I'm trying to come up with a better word for this, and I hope you guys can help me on this. RPG approach. So we have RPG format, right, which is tabletop, live action, computer-based, and solo adventure books and modules. When talking about the certifications, we have RPG pathways specific to, you're choosing a pathway in recreation, paid professional recreation game masters, and paid professional, educational settings for role-playing gaming, and paid professional therapeutic. So we've got those pathways, as we call them, on the certification side in the LLC. But then there's also layperson, right? Person who's not doing it to be a paid professional. They're engaging in the activity. They're approaching it as just recreation. And so I have layperson and then 4 professional approaches, and I'm trying to come up with a word that summarizes what those 5 approaches are. So I'm using RPG approach. If you guys can think of a better word, I would really appreciate it. I'm stuck on that one. I'm going to go with approach unless something better presents. So RPG approach could be layperson, or the 4 professional approaches, recreational, or entertainment / performance, or educational, or therapeutic, because that's each different approach to role-playing gaming. Anybody have any brainstorm ideas on a better phrase, or do you think that works sufficiently?
Do you just not like the way it sounds, or do you think it just doesn't get the point across as well as it could?
I feel like I have a niggling in the back of my head that there's a better word than approach, but I can't think of it. If you guys think approach works, great. I'll set it aside and not worry about it. But I try to be very particular about the words I use, so that they have an exact meaning as accurate as possible. But if you guys think that works, do you see any problems with using that particular phrase, or do you guys think that works okay?
I think it works fine.
Okay.
But I know what you mean where you think there could be something that's slightly better.
Yeah. Jonathan, do you have any input? Maybe lose Jonathan again?
It sounds something like expertise, but I think approach is acceptable.
Yeah, because expertise for a layperson doesn't quite... I get that for the professional side. I just don't know that connects on the layperson side, because I want to try to lump all 5 of those together under one term. If something occurs to you, let me know. Eric, anything jump out for you? Did we lose Eric?
Probably.
Okay. I'll keep moving along then. So RPG format, of course, we got tabletop, live action, computer-based solo adventure books and launches. Okay, therapeutic RPG. Closer to non-directed play, which is a reference in here on play therapy and therapeutic use of play. Has therapeutic supervision, but allows participants to find the issues on their own. The insights and skills developed are guided by the participant rather than the therapist. The inherent therapeutic benefits of RPG will manifest with only light planning and guidance necessary. There may only be a general sense of goals rather than specific goals, determined at the beginning of the program, and this approach allows for a wide range of possible benefits and outcomes. So that's therapeutic RPG versus RPG therapy. Closer to directed play, has therapeutic supervision, and the topics involved in the sessions are targeted based on goals of the participants, based on assessments, and intend to develop specific insights and or skills, usually from prior assessments and planning phases. Specific therapeutic goals are being targeted, and the role-playing game modality is deemed either to be the ideal fit for those goals and or will be modified to specifically target those goals. There may be many other benefits from using this modality, but specific aspects have been chosen for specific measurable goals. So you see the difference there between diversional use of RPG, therapeutic RPG, and RPG therapy. Any comments on those 3?
No, sounds good.
Okay. Jonathan?
No. Would it be possible to get a draft of this at some point?
At some point, yes, definitely. I will submit it to you guys for peer review before the final version goes out. But it's too much of a mess right now. I still have to get it down to the 30 pages, so there's no point sending it to you guys yet. You don't want to wait through.
To contribute a lot more when we have the draft, just because it's easier to just see something.
What's that?
As opposed to someone reading it to you.
What's that?
When you send the draft, it should be easier to notice things or give better feedback.
Oh, of course, yeah. And I'm not reading this in depth at all because it's 58 pages. So.
Oh, no, I know. I'm just also feeling like I'm not providing any feedback.
No, that's okay. It's just if things jump out at you. I just want to give you guys a general feel of what just this one chapter is going to cover, and you get a feel of what's coming in the pipe for the other bigger full books, like the RPG Professionals Handbook's 300 pages. So I just wanted you guys to have a little bit of feel for just how much wonderful content there is out there that I think you guys will really enjoy. So that's why I'm giving you this outline, just so you get a feel for, like, oh, there's so much good stuff. At least I hope that that's being communicated to you guys. RPG programming, RPG activities. We get into a few of the archetypes: rules lawyer, murder hobo, munchkin, casual player, tactician, player archetypes. Role-playing gamer versus just gamer. People seeking change. The RPG is the primary medium. Retrieval, which is a neuroscience reference. Rich mental imagery. Reforming, Tuckman. Sensory motor play. Social levels of play. Solitary play. Stereotype versus archetype. Storming, Tuckman. Symbolic play. Self-reference effect. testing effect, token-based economy, trait-based aggression, trauma, zero-sum game, and non-zero-sum game. So those I've got roughly alphabetized. I've still got other stuff I'm moving in there as I'm improving that. IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. IEP, Individualized Education Program. Problem solving, organization, planning, time management, math, social. Okay, somewhere here I had another section that I haven't moved over. Here we go. The RPG experience paradigm, components of the RPG experiences, participants, disequilibrium, novel settings, cooperative environment, unique problem solving, feelings of accomplishment, processing the experience, generalization and transfer, metaphoric learning, spontaneous metaphoric transference, analogous transference, structured metaphoric transference, isomorphism, narratives, reflective teams, and then of course we get to the summary. So that's just the definition section. Now I've noticed with the other chapters that they do have several pages of definitions, so I'm not alone in having a pretty lengthy definitions section. Some chapters have longer ones than others. So then we get into descriptions. So I talk about assessment, because remember we use the APIE. You guys remember what APIE DR stands for? Omar?
What is that? Can you repeat that?
APIE DR? APIE
No, I don't remember that.
Oh, I haven't covered that with you guys? I'm sorry. So this is common in nursing and in recreation therapy. It's an approach to program planning. So you do assessment, so A, planning, implementation, evaluation, and then documentation, and then reevaluation. So APIDR, or just API, is how it's often referenced. It's not, there's many different approaches to doing the same thing. In project management, you've got their different approaches. You know, every field has their own way of basically doing the same thing. Recreation therapy and nursing both use API, so that's appropriate to this book. So, since this is
How do you spell that?
APIEDR. So APIE is the core, and then alternately you can add D and R. Documentation's implied throughout, but for some people it needs to be spelled out. And then reevaluation, so you do reassessment, reevaluation, etc. Kind of R is kind of reassessment, replanning, reimplementation, reevaluation. It's just kind of that iterative loop that you keep doing periodically once you've implemented a program. So that's why API is the core, and then D and R are just kind of reminders.
Yeah, I think we covered this last week while Omar was sick.
Okay, so that was last week. Okay. Anyway, so assessment, based on intake information from participants, whether a formal facility or just a community center or game store, it's also critical to know your audience at many levels. First, would they be best served with informal diversional RPG either run by other participants rather than the therapeutic recreation specialist, or better with the TRS as facilitator? Even if this is an informal game store, convention, or community setting, and it is assumed the participants are not attending for any specific goals other than diversional recreation, if it is known by one means or another that one or more participants has any at-risk factors, even decisions at the diversional level could be critical to successful programs. Selecting different RPG formats, genres, settings, and systems are critical for any program. For example, it would be inappropriate to select Vampire the Masquerade in any format for very young participants. We do not want 5-year-olds playing Vampire the Masquerade. The mature content there is just not appropriate. Could you do a kid version of it? Of course, you could modify it, but you would not want to play the game as is. Generally not recommended.
I want to see a 5-year-old version of Vampire the Masquerade. I'm very curious how that could be done.
Is that your new research project for next year?
Yeah.
Generally not recommended for younger adults without careful supervision. While No Thank You Evil is initially entertaining for all ages from about 5 years old on up, or a little younger with parental help, and is fun for adults for maybe 1 or 2 sessions, it does not hold up for long-term campaigns for most people from the teenage level on up. Although the Montessori Kids School Montessori school kids kind of surprised me. Between their choices of games, they actually preferred No Thank You Evil, and they're like 12-year-old boys and such. And I was kind of surprised that they really wanted more of that. Before proposing an RPG-related activity, it would be best to have some assessment information, either informal or more formal, to determine the best fit for the participants starting out with the following. The best intervention level: diversional RPG, therapeutic RPG, or RPG therapy. Again, that's another one. I'm looking for a term that I could use. What would I put those three under? What would be a single term that lumps diversional RPG, therapeutic RPG, or RPG therapy? I've got intervention level. I'm not quite happy with that. Any ideas that occur to you, when you see this later, feel free to give feedback. RPG format. So that's tabletop, live action, computer-based solo adventure books. Now that could be just if they went through any kind of LIM or LAM, so leisure interest measure or leisure assessment measure or other assessment tools. You could extrapolate if they want more physical activity, then you might want to go more with LARP. Or if your population is dispersed geographically, you might want to go with computer-based. Or there are things that you just know very quickly which format would be a better fit. The facilities may only have room for tabletop. Okay, well, then that's decided for you. So facilities, environment, and availability. Do you have the space? And when is it available? And how noisy is it? And what is it like, etc. This is something that's why I created the wheelchair-friendly RPG bus and trailer, is because facilities have a lot of challenges. Accessibility considerations, same thing. But also including things like braille dice towers, pen holders, braille character sheets, etc. Equipment availability. Do you have what you need for paper and pencils and a table and chairs? Staffing availability. Do you have what you need for game masters, and do you have assistants to help you set up and manage things? Session duration, frequency, and timeline. How much time do you have available to run? How rigid is it going to be? How frequently will we be playing? Will we be doing 45 minutes 3 to 5 times a week? Are you going to be doing 3-hour sessions once a week? These are all important considerations. You need to know these things. Is it going to be a one-shot? Is it going to be ongoing for a month? Is it going to be ongoing for years? You need to know that. Genre preference. So now you want to get a feel for the players of what they like. Some people don't like sci-fi, fantasy, superhero, supernatural, horror type stuff, and others only like one area. So it's good to know that, because if you're going to have multiple game table offerings and offering different genres, then you'll kind of want to know who's going to have the most fun at which tables. The setting preference or knowledge. Some people really know a lot about Star Wars or Doctor Who or Middle Earth, and might really enjoy being in that setting where they can really apply that, and they get very excited about it. Whereas they might not want to be in a Rifts or Robotech or Firefly or some other setting that they don't know much about. So getting an idea of what they do know and don't know can be helpful there. Or, maybe they want to try something new. Player style propensity. So cooperation and trust scale is also important to know on that. If they're going to be a more cooperative player that trusts others or is going to try to be more independent. The Bartle taxonomy of players. Or other similar assessment tools to figure out what their style is going to be. You may not want to put a bunch of people who like exploration, narrative, and role play, RLE play, together with a bunch of wargamer types that want to just be murder hobos. It's good to have a mix in a group, but maybe it makes sense to have all the murder hobos at one table together. They'll have a grand old time because you have a GM who likes that particular style at that table. Or, mix it up so that you don't get too many dominating any one table and scatter them throughout the different tables so you get a good mix and balance. And then system complexity propensity. So do these people like a more simple game system, or do they like a deeper, more complex system that's more detailed, more quote-unquote crunchy bits, as we talked about before? So these are all assessments that can be done, you can do very quickly, informally, just through a few quick questions, or more formally, as we've done with some of our intake assessment tools over the years, and really get drilled down into what people are really interested in. Because a lot of times people don't know. A big part of recreation therapy is leisure education. A lot of times people, their concept of leisure is it used to be just television. Now we add, YouTube and watching their phone and playing video games. But basically, screen time or partying with friends. If you ask a large percentage of the population when surveyed, their concept of leisure time is screen time or partying with friends, and that's it. That is their whole concept of what to do with leisure time. And they don't think of all these other activities, the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other activities that they could engage in that are available to them, because they don't even know. And they're not, and whether it's the zip code they're in, the social status that they're at, income-wise, or whatever the reason, a lot of people just haven't been educated about what their recreational opportunities are and what to do with their leisure time that could benefit them far more than vegging in front of a screen or, imbibing alcohol or drugs and such. So that's a key part of recreation therapists is that recreation education. And we have these assessment tools, some of which have been tested pretty well, from the Red Book, when you do a leisure interest assessment and such, about getting an idea of what they know already, and maybe that you spend a little time about other opportunities. For example, role-playing games, right? A lot of people never even consider it. So you get the idea there. So then I have to, between the 3 different intervention levels, diversional RPG, therapeutic RPG, and RPG therapy, I then have to break each of those 3 down, and for that I have to do the facilitator, the setting, the participants, the materials, the evaluation, and then a summary. So I do all of those for diversional RPG, then I do all of those for therapeutic RPG, and I do all of those for RPG therapy. That's just, again, following their standardized format. So it's this formatting that's kind of tripped me up a little bit, because I have all this stuff written, but trying to get it to fit, exactly the way they want it has taken some rejiggering. Then finally, I get to go to history. So my problem with that is, of course, with presentations, if we don't cover the history first, especially dispelling the myths and allegations out there, a lot of people can't hear what I'm saying during the presentation, because they've got, well, what about this? What about this? I heard this, and I was told this, and blah, blah, blah. And my experience has been at presentations, it's a waste of time if I don't shoot down the myths and allegations first, or at least, present them, talk about them, and show the evidence. Then we can move forward. But that's in a presentation format. So I guess it's less of an issue in a book format where they can jump around and digest it over more time. But it does...
Yeah, I feel like, especially where it's being presented, there may not be as much of a strong bias.
Oh, yes, there is. So most recreational therapists come from either a sports/jock background or an outdoors background, has been my experience. And every time I presented at therapeutic recreation conferences, oh boy, especially if they're older TRs, but because I present at conferences, I've done a few for students in college, but usually it's been the professional conferences where they're getting their CEUs and such, their continuing education units. And so there's a whole range, mostly older rec therapists, and then the new ones that are coming in. And the new ones that are coming in, they mostly think of role-playing games as computer-based. The middle range ones think more of LARP, and then the older ones think of tabletop D&D and all of the evils of D&D because of what they heard in the 80s. So there's a cohort effect there. But recreational therapists do not come from a role-playing game background. Is what for whatever reason, that has been quite a struggle. I've presented now to hundreds of recreational therapists and spoken to hundreds of them, and it's still also a minority that are actually interested in the. So, for example, when they get to choose between competing presentations, I do okay. I mean, if we, the conferences aren't huge, but I tend to get about 30 to 50% of the participants. So at least I get a fair split. I assumed sometimes I was going to have dead room because I was up against facilitation of children with disabilities and such. I figured they're all going to go to that. And I did okay. I got about 50% of the participants, and I was, we had a smaller room, but it was packed. And so I've been surprised. But then after the presentation's over, probably only about half of them want to engage in conversation and have then followed through with wanting to implement programs, which is still great. That's still not bad numbers. But mainly they come out of curiosity of like, what's this whole role-playing game thing? And they generally have all these preconceived notions. So the good thing is at least those preconceived notions usually get addressed early on. But yeah, recreational therapists, unfortunately, are pretty ignorant about what a role-playing game is. And so I've had to do that with all those presentations. But anyway, so finally we get to the history. I do a quick thing on war games in general. The 1913, who was it who released the book and what was it called in 1913 that changed wargaming to become available to the general public?
It was... Oh, it's on the tip of my tongue. Now all I'm thinking of is the famous guy, which I also can't remember his name.
It's a famous author. Omar, do you remember? 1913. There was a book published.
I can see the picture
Okay.
of him sitting in his war room with his wargaming on the floor.
Yep. You got the right picture in mind. Omar? No? Jonathan, do you know?
That was a famous name, too. Like,
Yep, it is.
Is it H.G. Wells?
Yes! Ding, 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 ding. H.G. Wells. Do you remember the title of the book?
Little Wars.
Yes, excellent. All right. Nicely done. And then later, as science fiction fantasy became more popular, and then The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings introduced a new style of fantasy. In 1968, development began, and in 1971, the publication of What War Game Supplement. It had like one page in the back that brought in fantasy options for wargaming. Who remembers what the name of that game was?
I can remember the cover art again.
Okay, Gary Gygax was co-creator with another with Perrin. So they started.
This is the one that was just before D&D, right?
Yes. This is the precursor to it. So they started development in 68. It published in 71. It provided their own version of wargaming rules, but then in the back there was a page or two supplement that had added magic and fantastical creatures to this wargame system.
I feel like it was something in something, but
Nope.
I can't.
Nope, it's one word.
Then I'm completely off base.
Okay, Omar?
No, me with remembering names is.
I got to get you guys on the online platform. By the way, the online education platform is working. I'm just doing some final updates to the database, and I'll set you guys up with access so you can start going through the introductory RPG 99 course, so you guys can get this stuff fresh in your head, because you're going to want to be able to reference this stuff all the time. This is stuff you should have at the tip just automatically. Jonathan.
That one I do not know.
Chainmail.
I don't remember that at
No,
all.
I didn't actually.
Okay, I'm sorry. So, unfortunately, between different groups, my apologies if I didn't cover that with you guys previously.
No,
No, it's
been brought up.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just don't remember it at all.
Okay, yeah. Well, that was the immediate predecessor to D&D. It was because of chainmail that D&D evolved. So they started having favorite generals and leaders, and then they started to do the underground adventure concept using the chainmail rules. And really, when D&D came out, original D&D in 1974, it was basically just a D6 and a D20. They didn't use other dice. They didn't use D4, D8, and all of that in the original edition. And you had very few classes. It was much closer to a war game, but it was meant for dungeon crawling and such. And in later supplements, so the first 3 books came out, and they started adding supplements, which added more complex rules than just the chainmail style combat. Then D&D really became more fleshed out with the other 3-4 supplements. But that's why it owes such a strong, D&D specifically has such a strong relationship with wargaming, because of how it evolved from chainmail. So that's why it's worth noting. It has a particular effect to D&D style of play, which has changed over the decades, but you can still really see the strong legacy of it. All right, then I cover D&D in 74, the 1980s myths and legends, bothered about Dungeons & Dragons and NCTV, the National Council Against Television Violence, Patricia Poling and Dr. Thomas Radecki. Also the ongoing attacks from Pat Robertson, the 700 Club. I found some new video, new to me, video from the early 90s of Pat Robertson talking about how he did an exorcism on a girl who had become possessed because of her exposure to gaming and such. I was like, wow, I didn't know he'd gone. He'd always kept saying, well, I knew games made people demonic, role-playing games made people demonic. Now I finally found one of his early stories about that. I was like, oh my goodness. Lingering inculcated stigma, Big Bang Theory. For example, this school here at Eagle Peak Schools, one of the first things, the principal got assailed by a number of parents worried that D&D was against their religion because they were talking about bringing role-playing gaming into the school. So we had to address that in our presentation early on. But allegations led to research. And now I get to jump to the section of the book, Theoretical Foundations. And so then that's been laying out the different information that's available there. Then second, parallels and related knowledge domains. Third, utilization and adaptation. Now, I use utilization in the way that utilization is meant to be used. So when you use something, you're using something the way it was designed to be used. When you utilize something, you're using it in a different way than originally intended. So if I use a wrench, if I utilize a wrench as a hammer, the role of a hammer, that's not its normal intentional use. Using role-playing games for therapy is not their original intentional use, so I'm utilizing it to achieve therapeutic goals. I'm utilizing it for educational goals. I get a little grief that utilization and utilizing is a more archaic term, and I should just use using all the time. But again, I'm kind of picky about very specific word meanings. And I think it's important to make that differentiation that we use role-playing games to have fun for diversional activities. We utilize role-playing games to achieve educational and therapeutic goals, because that's not their original design. The people who are adamantly against therapeutic gaming and educational gaming, who they say, get your school and get your therapy out of my game, it's important to make that differentiation. I found that's helped diffuse some of those people when I say, well, this is an adaptation. I'm not saying that D&D should always be used for therapy and education. I'm doing an adaptation of it. I'm utilizing it in this way. And that sometimes helps diffuse some of their defensiveness about it. These are usually the same people who are also against pay-to-play and such, professional game mastering. Comments on that so far?
No. Nothing on my end.
Okay. Jonathan?
Nope.
Okay. Then I have to get into a section on effectiveness, and causal studies. So we were just talking about this. Then I can include some testimonials and case studies. And so we've got a few examples I'm going to use for depression and suicide, for muscular dystrophy ages 6 to 17 using tabletop, LARP, and drumming, for social phobia, panic disorder, and agoraphobia using computer-based and tabletop role-playing gaming, for at-risk youth, modification of trait-based aggression and other behaviors with tabletop RPG. And then the next section is intervention implementation exercises, where I give them a couple of example programs that these TRs could implement. So program 1, I'm looking at Autism Spectrum public transit skills development, the Z-Day adventure that I've talked about over the years, using tabletop and LARP to help people actually learn to use their actual public transit system and schedules. You do it first as an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. trying to stop a bad guy. You use the actual city map and bus schedule and public transit schedule of your town in the game at the tabletop. And then towards the end, you transition it to a LARP. Nobody has to wear any funny costumes. You have a few people help as NPCs. They might have a Post-it stuck to their chest or something. And you try to, get the bad guy. But the key is that they actually use the bus and public transit system in real life at that point. They've had lots of time to practice it at home on the tabletop. Now they get to do it in real life. And then there's a twist that I hope someday will happen. I've never had a chance to do this yet, but I hope it'll happen someday. Different cities around the country have what's known as a zombie walk. And the bad guy you're trying to stop is trying to release a virus through the public transit system that will turn everybody into zombies. And so what happens in the LARP at the end, if you turn right, if they make the right choices, they turn right and they stop the bad guy. But this is a situation where failure actually might be cooler, because if they don't get there in time, if they take too long to figure out the clues to stop the bad guy, they turn left, and now you see walking down the street hundreds of zombies, because it's, you time it just right. I've yet to have the opportunity to make that happen, but I hope someday I can time that to happen. Because that would be very cool, I think. Another program is Brain Injury Recovery Rehab, RPG-based rehabilitation program using all 4 RPG formats. So as they come out of coma and they have basic interaction, you verify that they're oriented, but they have basic response, binary responses through eye blinks and hand squeezes. You start with reading them a Choose Your Own Adventure style or SABM style adventure, and then slowly as they recover, then you migrate them to adapted turn-based role-playing game that waits for input and uses whatever interface modifiers are necessary depending upon their injury and limitations. Then transition them as they continue to recover to tabletop, and then transition them to LARP as they become more and more physically active. And all through the stages of recovery over a several years long process. With brain injury recovery, it takes 2-3 years before you kind of plateau. Using all 4 of those formats in progression. And then program number 3 for at-risk youth, civic and social skills development. Start with tabletop and then potentially go LARP. The default version set in 1940s gumshoe mystery detective adventure, but it can be set in a modern day police procedural setting, no problem. The goal is, though, that they learn to use resources like the clinic, the hospital, the doctor's office, the fire department, the police station, movie theaters, all these different civic skills of day-to-day life, learning to use those through the game as they unravel clues of the missing surgeon and such. They get exposed to this. This can work for both younger populations, but also older populations that maybe have the developmental delays or other reasons that they need more practice with these types of skills and development. So I was trying to give a variety of populations and a variety of targeted goals there. Comments, suggestions, feedback on that?
Nope. Sounds pretty good.
Omar?
No, nothing.
Jonathan?
No, sounds good.
Okay. Let's see here. So then conclusion, and then I have to write discussion questions. Then resources, which include agency and web-based resources. So that's going to be some of the others out there, like Game to Grow and Bodana Group, and of course RPG Research and RPG Therapeutics. Osterkov After School in Denmark, Renaissance Adventures in Boulder, Colorado, Roleplay Workshop in Oakland, California, Mythic RPG in Pennsylvania. And then material resources like the IJRP, WordCon Companion, where is it? I had it out here. Role-playing game studies, and a few other related books. Bowman's book on role-playing gaming. Then some of my books that are about to come out, which will probably be published before this chapter. This is a textbook. These things take forever to roll out. So several of those books that are in the queue right now. And then references, finally, net references where I get to put all the citations and such. So that's the layout of that chapter, which will have lots of meat to it. It will not be fluff. So just thought you guys would be interested to hear that. Did you find that of value?
Yeah, we know what we'll be looking for when you send us a draft. I assume you'll have us read through it.
Yeah.
Or want us to.
Yes, oh definitely. Yeah, no, I want a full review from each of you for improvements I can make before the final draft. So I won't be able to wait too long. I've got to get it submitted to tell them it's way overdue as it is, but I'll fire it to everybody on the team for review to try to improve it as much as possible. And then I'll also have my fiance is a tech writer and used to teach at Seattle University. She was an English teacher and everything, so she's been helpful with just kind of cleaning up some of the grammar and such, because as picky as I can be, she's even pickier, which is great. Although I get a little irritated because she's been, because of in tech writing, they keep telling her to dumb down her language. So she's been starting to do that to me, and I'm like, no, I'm not doing tech writing. You don't have to tell me to dumb down my language. I'm assuming these are higher education level. I do not want to dumb down the language. Please don't make me do it. Sadly, tech writing, so 10 years ago, she had to dumb down the language to about 9th to 10th grade level at most places like Microsoft, etc., where she works. Microsoft, AT&T, etc. AT&T, she recently had to dumb it down to 6th grade level because the general populace vocabulary and reading level has been dropping, sadly. And so that's very disturbing.
I've not heard that.
Yeah, it's that's what the tech industry has found is as they continue to do market research, they regularly do market research on their consumers, and they've steadily had to drop. So in the 80s, it was closer to college level, 12th grade or college level writing is how they wrote to the audience, and then about 10 years ago, it was at the 9th or 10th grade level, and now the industry standard is to drop it down to the 6th grade level.
Sounds like that could be in large part because more people with less education are reading tech. Yeah,
you have a broader audience that you're trying to explain these things to. But
I'm a firm believer that you need, whether it's technology or the sciences, you need to be able to communicate to both. So yeah, you don't have to dumb down if you're writing to peers.
Yeah.
And it's actually not about, part of that too is not so much, I can't speak for tech, but not so much about dumbing down, but understanding that not everyone understands what constructs you're referring to and things like that.
Yes, well that's a different thing. Yeah, that's a different thing. We're talking specifically about English grammar and vocabulary. We're not talking the technical.
I see.
Yeah, that if you have too long a sentence with too many commas, that they can't cognitively hold those concepts in their head. It's literally dumbing down.
Okay.
It is literally dumbing down.
Yeah, that's a little pedantic to the average man.
It's very, very, and it frustrates the heck out of her because she went from master's level English teacher and everything to having to do that, and it frustrates. So she gets her editors keep saying your education is showing, dumb it down. So they have very specific criteria, and it's very, oh my goodness, it's frustrating. And I've seen it with role playing games, and you guys, I don't know if you, Jonathan, have heard me rant about this before, but the dumbing down of role playing games, I feel does a disservice because a lot of the benefits from earlier research in role playing games were help people with math and literacy and reading comprehension, etc. I feel they're getting less benefits. So by lowering the bar, you're not raising people up as high as you used to be able to do so. Because I saw people with huge impairments, real challenges, whether it's because of their education or because of other disabilities. The role-playing game, the challenge of reading it and doing the math raised them up. Because of the recreational activity being fun, it raised them up. Now, you don't hit them with it all at once. If somebody's got a struggle, you don't hit them with all the heavy math and all that up front. You do it in layers, and you do a progressive increase in challenge. But by having that there was a bar that that they had to strive to, I felt that always helped people more. Versus dumbing down the game, you're going to reduce the level of benefit that people get. And that's been kind of a pet peeve of mine for about 15 years as I've watched a lot of these books come out with simpler grammar or simpler vocabulary, a lot more fluff, and really do feel like they're talking down to people more. From what I read, I'm just like, wow, do you really have to belabor that point that much? And I've seen it in some of our TV programming and stuff too. It really feels like just a general dumbing down, and that's different than being more accessible. See, the argument they use is they're trying to be more accessible, and I'm a huge accessibility advocate, but I think they actually do people a disservice with some of these approaches. And it's not everywhere, it's just a general trend that seems to be happening. I have not done a formal study on that, so this is just my opinion. It is not good research, but that's been one of my little pet peeves. Maybe someday I can do a little study, maybe combined with my fiance or something, to see if that's actually a thing or not. Like, because they use tools that can evaluate. You stick in a document and it tells you what reading level that document is considered to be at, and so it'd be interesting to do that. Take a bunch of PDFs of the older role-playing games and then the newer ones, and see if there's any trending shown up with that evaluation. I think that would be an interesting study to see if it's just me being an old curmudgeon or if there really is a thing. What's that?
I was just laughing.
Yeah. Like, children these days, what's going on around here? It's not like when I was. Rah, rah, rah. So, all right, we have about a half hour left that we can go, unless you want to discuss anything, other topics that you guys wanted to discuss. Is there anything you guys wanted to bring up or discuss related to your projects? Anything in general that you think you'd like to discuss before we jump back into Robin's Laws for a little bit?
Not at this time.
Okay, Omar?
Sorry, I was coughing. No, not really.
Okay, and Jonathan? Did we lose Jonathan? Nope, he's resetting.
Just for a second.
Okay, welcome back. Anything you
I'm
wanted?
here.
Anything you wanted to cover, Jonathan?
No, but I'm curious to see, eager to read your book chapter to kind of see if I can assist in any way with some of those terms, and also to see kind of where that project is going, because that's pretty cool.
Yeah, you will definitely get a chance to in the next couple of weeks. I'll have a draft ready, so I look forward.
I will have to be leaving in the next 10 minutes.
Understood.
For a class.
Understood.
But yeah, I will see you at PAX, so
wonderful.
We'll be the next.
Look forward to it. You have my cell phone number, right?
I believe I do, yes.
If you...
I will shoot you an email just to confirm.
Good.
Or yeah.
It's also on the website. If you just go to the news section of the website, it says visit us at PAX, and I've got all my contact info there.
Your contact information out there.
Okay. Yep. So no excuse.
Yeah, no.
All right.
I will find you.
Look forward to seeing you. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into Robin's Laws from where we left off then. And I've been slowly getting the videos added to the checklist on these discussions so that, if you miss it, you can catch up on it. So, all right. So we stopped on page 11 just after homebrew rules. Putting my post-it here that I've been sticking in. And we talked about game complexity. Okay, so we're jumping to campaign design. Page 12. And I'm going to start and stop the video because now we're switching topics. Be right back.